Welcome to Rica Subtest 2 online test preparation course presented by ricatest.com. Thank you so much for joining. In this lesson, you will learn everything you need to know about competency number 15, how to promote students' comprehension of informational text. Let's get started. All right, informational texts are often used in the classroom while teaching content areas such as social studies, science, mathematics, health, visual, and performing arts. Now, in order for students to learn these subjects, they need to be taught research and study skills, which we're going to cover in this lesson. So let's get into that. Teachers must explicitly and directly teach students how to read and how to learn from these informational texts, which are presented differently than story based texts. Content area textbooks include organizational charts, graphs, and diagrams. They also include typographic and graphic features, including pictures within captions, which we'll discuss how to teach right in this lesson. There are many other types of informational textbooks and different types of resource books alongside textbooks. So, for example, some resource texts include encyclopedias, almanacs, thesauruses, atlases, dictionaries, magazines, newspapers, online news articles, how to manuals, databases, posters, advertisements, brochures, and really so many more. The key skill to teach students about reading informational texts compared to reading a storybook is that readers are selective in what they read. Unlike a story where you start from the beginning and read until the end, informational texts are read by finding the area you need and then starting there. For example, when looking a word up in a dictionary, a person will use their knowledge of the alphabet to jump straight to the word that they're looking for, not start at the beginning and turn each page until they've reached the word. Similarly, we read a product manual by finding the section that's applicable, or most applicable to our needs, and once again, not starting at the beginning, just going right into it. Now, for your Rica test, you'll want to know the following 6 information text structures: the questions and the transition words that are commonly used. Let's do that right now. We have chronological, sequential, cause and effect, compare and contrast, problem and solution, and description. Let's look at each in depth individually. Chronological is a text structure that describes events in the order that they occur. Common transition words include first, second, third, later, next, before, then, finally, after, when, since, now, and previously. Common questions to identify chronological order include: what items, events, or steps are listed? Do they have to always happen in this certain order? What sequence of events is being described here? What are the major incidents that occur or that occurred? And how is this structure revealed in the text? Sequential is next, and this is what happens in sequence. So when the author uses a list to place items in certain order. Common transition words and questions are the same as the ones mentioned in sequence. So here we have sequential, same ones as the last example. There we go. Cause and effect is our next. And here is the structure, which is commonly found in science textbooks. And this shows that some result has happened from some other event. Common transition words to show that this is cause and effect include if, then, reasons why, as a result, therefore, because, consequently, since, so that, for, and due to. Common questions for cause and effect include: what happened, why did it happen, and what caused it to happen. The compare and contrast structure identifies similarities and differences between two or more people, places, events, objects, or more. To represent the compare and contrast structure, we use the Venn diagram. Common transition words used to indicate comparison and contrast include however, yet, nevertheless, on the other hand, but whereas similarly, although also likewise in contrast, comparison, different, either or, in the same way, and just as. Common questions used to indicate comparison and contrast include what items are being compared, in what ways are they similar, in what ways are they different, what conclusion does the author reach about these items. The problem and solution structure presents a problem and later offers a solution or explanation. Common transition words here for problem and solution include problem is, dilemma is, if then, because, so that, question and answer, and puzzle is solved. Next, common questions that involve problem and solution include what is the problem? Why is this a problem? Is anything being done to try and solve the problem? What can be done to solve the problem? The description structure describes a topic by listing characteristics, features, attributes, and examples. Common transition words for the description type of texts include for example, characteristics, for instance, such as including, and to illustrate. Common question words for description include what are the most important characteristics, how is it being described, and what is important to remember about it. Next, in this section, we will cover the three main types of informational text structures to help students effectively locate and understand meaning of expository or informational texts. So these include organizational features, typographic features, and graphic features. Organizational features include table of contents, glossary, as well as the index. Next, the typographic features include italics, bold facing, underlining, color coding. Then, graphic features that students can learn to read include charts, maps, diagrams, and illustrations. Once students demonstrate the ability to identify common text structures and text features, it's time to equip them with the study skills in order to learn from informational texts. See, informational text requires students to read at different paces for different purposes. We skim read to quickly read for the purpose of previewing or reviewing a text. Here, teachers model skimming by using Think Aloud so children can understand the entire process. For example, I am going to quickly read to preview the text. Next, we can scan a passage when we're looking for specific information, such as the answer to a worksheet question in the textbook. Again, the teacher will model how to scan the text so that the students understand what the purpose of this is. Here she says, we scan a passage when we're looking for specific information. You directly and explicitly teach these skills to the students. Now we have in-depth reading, and this is another type of reading that we use for informational texts. Here, the students read a text for full understanding. The teacher says, I will read closely and carefully to totally understand this text. While students use in-depth reading, they use the next study skill, which is note taking. So, in depth reading is connected with note taking as well as outlining. Both note taking and outlining are taught using the gradual release of responsibility technique. Remember, this is where the teacher uses modeling and think alouds to complete a note taking or outline task while the students observe the appropriate way to complete the task. On the second lesson, the teacher does not do all the work. Instead, the teacher and the students equally contribute to complete the task. This often involves the use of students coming to the board, writing or verbally saying, and then the teacher writes what the children say. Then on the third lesson, if the students have demonstrated the ability to complete the task in the second lesson with the teacher's support, then it's time for this third lesson where the students actually complete the task independently. While these students are working independently, the teacher can work in small groups with students who are still struggling to understand the concept that's being taught. Building from study skills are teaching students reading skills. And the first here is how to identify research topics. As students learn to choose topics, common issues teachers face happens to be first, the students choose too large a topic. They might say, I want to research soccer, but we know that's just too big of a topic. Or, on the other hand, students also choose too narrow of a topic. They might want to choose their favorite YouTuber, for example. And in this case, there's just probably not going to be enough written content that the student can read to learn from. Now, in order to support our students best, in order to identify great research topics, to support them in achieving the standards that we're going to be assessing for, what we do is we provide students with a short list of topics that we know currently work well. Teachers help students find a central thesis, which helps them write with purpose and with passion. Finding information from one source is not enough, so teachers need to teach students to use multiple sources when researching. So far in Competency 15, you've learned how to teach students to identify common text structures and text features. In this next section, you'll learn the 4 strategies to help students comprehend informational texts by identifying common text structures and also text features. The first strategy is to evaluate the text logic and consistency through its structural patterns, such as chronological, cause and effect, compare and contrast, problem and solution, and description, in combination with the student's understanding that text features, such as typographic features and graphic features, all help carry meaning on the page. They're all there because they have a purpose. Remember, we use the gradual release of responsibility strategy to create a short sequence of lessons that teach children to evaluate an informational text's logic and consistency through evaluating the structural patterns of the text. Now, the second strategy children can use to comprehend informational texts is to analyze the author's point of view. We use the instructional strategy called questioning the author, which we've discussed in the past. And this is where the teacher uses the think aloud strategy to model reading a paragraph and then rereading it in order, for example, to show them here I am going to pause and reread because this part feels important. And notice that direct, explicit instruction is so good for the students to understand. Also, here I am going to pause here and reread because this part feels confusing. Both of these reasons will allow the students to reread and better comprehend the text that they're reading. Next, the teacher will use the questioning the author to analyze the author's intent. Using these questions, number 1, what is the author really trying to tell me here? Number 2, why is the author telling me this? Number 3, is the author's message stated clearly? And number 4, how could you state the message even more clearly than the author did? The third strategy that we teach students to comprehend informational texts is to find a connection. Again, we've discussed this in the past, but let's review it here. From informational texts to personal experiences, or books that they've already read in the past, or to the world. Maybe the news, movies, plays, vacations, or other things that they have experienced. They can connect to the world and what's going on. Now, when using the find a connection strategy, the teacher needs to enable the students to produce their connection by either speaking it out loud as part of a discussion or writing it down within their notebook. The fourth strategy for teaching informational texts is to identify similarities and differences between two different texts. This is where students read two or more texts on the same topic and compare the information that they find. Teachers can provide a Venn diagram for students to write the information as they collect it. Once the teacher has taught the students the comprehension strategy, for example, evaluate structural patterns, analyze the author's point of view, find a connection, or the fourth strategy, identify similarities and differences between texts, the teacher needs to provide the students with an opportunity to practice this strategy by completing an activity. However, the activity that the teacher chooses will depend on the purpose of the assessment, whether the teacher wants to understand which students have mastered the content and skills of the topics before it's taught, in which case we'll use an entry level activity, which works best for the teacher to understand each individual student's level by using a written activity, such as completing a KWL chart, making a poster, writing a paragraph about a topic or summarizing it, or adding a Venn diagram and comparing and contrasting two different topics or one topic from two different authors. Now, if the teacher's purpose is to provide an activity to allow the students to demonstrate their understanding of the text in the middle of a lesson, the teacher will use what's called the progress monitoring assessment method, which we can recall from past lessons. This is an informal assessment by nature and therefore uses spoken activity framework. Assessments might include a discussion format where the teacher will use a KWL chart and they'll talk about it. They might use think, pair, share, or turn and talk. They might use a retell or a summary. They might compare and contrast. Finally, if the teacher is providing the students with an activity at the end of a lesson or at the end of a unit, in order to check whether they have met the standard, the teacher will use what's called a summative activity, which requires the formal or written activity. Let's put all of this information together. Make sure to pause the video and understand these concepts. Remember, if before the unit or before the lesson, we're going to use an entry level assessment. Entry level means a written assessment. If the teacher wants to check for current understanding during the lesson or during the unit, we'll use a progress monitoring assessment. This is a spoken informal assessment. And finally, if the teacher wants to provide an activity in order to assess the student's understanding once they have completed a lesson or a unit, this teacher will use the summative assessment or a summative activity to provide for an assessment, and in which case, this teacher will use, again, a formal written assessment. Remember that the entire teaching process is systematic, in that the teacher analyzes students' assessments to create both individual and class profiles. And it's these profiles that guide the teacher to design lesson plans that fit each individual student's needs, whereupon the teacher directly and explicitly teaches to the standard using the gradual release of responsibility model, using teacher modeling as well as think alouds, where eventually the students are given the practice to demonstrate their understanding of the standard being taught through this assessment. And then, furthermore, the cycle continues. Remember, assess, analyze, and teach. Competency 15 really covered a lot. So before we leave, let's cover the key takeaways. First, you learn to recognize key characteristics of informational materials, such being that they include textbooks, news articles, consumer manuals, websites, and so many more. Then you learn the 6 different text structures, including how to teach our students to read and recognize and identify them. Then you learn the strategies to teach our students to recognize and identify informational text features. Next, you learned all about the study skills that students need to learn, which include different types of reading for different types of purposes, including the method to teach them, which is through the gradual release of responsibility model. Also, we built off study skills to cover research skills that help students pick up a just right topic as well as methods to collect information, such as note taking and creating an outline. Then you learn that students who have not yet been trained to read informational text will often try to read them as though they are a story. However, we know that we don't begin at the beginning and end at the end with informational text. Instead, what's different with informational text is that you find the most applicable place to start for you and you jump right into that text right there. Thank you so much for joining us in this Rica Test lesson. When you're ready, go ahead, take the Competency 15 quiz, check your understanding, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.